Welcome to the Rue Papers.
My name is Rebecca Stone. Was a librarian at Ellington Library. This is my dying statement. I understand from consulting the legal testaments that dying statements must be taken as truth, no matter what. Then here it is. I started work at Ellington Library when I was 18. It was not soon after it opened. Thomas Ellington was dead, but the library still opened. I am not sure who owned it then. Some kind of corporation. I didn't care then, as long as I got to work with the books. What surprised me was their paranormal section. Such collection. All kinds of authors, Harry Price and Conan Doyle, and people I'd never heard of. And it was added to constantly. Every month a new collection of books and magazines and articles arrived. I read them avidly. I believed in ghosts, and I desperately wanted to see one. I wanted to know there was something more. I longed for something more. I needed more than the life I had. I wish I had found it. Days went by, day after day. Received the books, catalogued the books, read the books, issued the books. And though I loved the books, I ached for something more exciting. I used to go to stately homes at weekends and dark alleyways, and for my holidays I went to Edinburgh and York. I wanted to see a ghost. I wanted to see a beautiful grey lady waft down a corridor, or a headless coachman race through the streets, or a little child sing a nursery rhyme. Other people experience these things. Why couldn't I? Never so much as a shiver down the spine. We were never allowed in the attic, but that was fine. Every library has a forbidden space, somewhere with the precious texts that you are not allowed to go into. The books that fall apart, the books of knowledge no one is supposed to know, the ones older than the building itself. All libraries. Yes, even your nice ordinary high street library. Even those mobile libraries that are on a bus have a box under the desk with the texts they can't have on the shelf. But they have to have them ready, just in case. Just in case the right person asks for them. As time went on, I became obsessed with that attic. We'd hear things from that attic. Screaming and crying and sobbing. I think it was a record, even when I really wanted to believe. You know what it reminded me of? Those stories about smugglers pretending to be ghosts so that everyone in the village would stay away from the churchyard after dark. It just didn't feel right. Now, what bothered me were the readers. The readers that disappeared. You'd see them sitting in the desks, the readers behind the shelves, before we went all open plan. Then you could find people hidden behind all sorts of corners. You'd go round to the Legends of Mountaineering or Memoirs of the Great Spiritualist section and find somebody sitting there, head bent over a book, studying it steadily. And they'd look up at you as if they weren't quite sure where they were, and then they'd ignore you completely as they read. I used to do a tour of the building when we closed, worried one of those readers would still be there. Sometimes I'd come in the morning and open up and turn a corner, and one of them would be there. Then one day I mentioned these readers to the other library workers, and they all said, "Who?" What readers? So, of course, they hadn't seen them. And after they said that, neither did I. It was like now I was aware they shouldn't be there, I didn't see them anymore. The new manager called me in to talk about it. Rose Beckton. She'd only just joined a few years before. Everyone else was annoyed that no one from within the library had been promoted to manager, but I didn't mind. I didn't want to be manager, and she was nice to us. I realised one day that she lived in the flat next to the library, and I noticed she was there at all hours of the day and night. I thought perhaps she was lonely, so one afternoon I invited her out with me for our lunch break. She was so surprised. I don't think she expected anyone to ask her that. The other librarians hadn't exactly been subtle about their dislike. She said no, but I get the feeling it was an automatic no. Like she was so used to saying no, she didn't know how to say yes. So I asked again the next week, and this time she said yes. I did most of the talking, and it became clear she really didn't know much about life outside of the library. Neither did I, really. But I knew more than her. Still, we sort of decided, without actually talking about it, that we were going to live a little. We went to art galleries, and museums, and cinemas, and then to the seaside, and pop concerts, and silly little festivals, and just all over. We used to take our breaks together at the back of the building, smoking secretly. I don't think she liked smoking, but she gave me a beautiful lighter. I asked her in one of those breaks what was in the attic, and she said, wonderful things, horrible things, and then told me if I knew that I was her very first friend. How could I abandon her after that? It was fun. I had fun. And she never really said so, but she had fun too, I think. It seemed to be a weight off her shoulders when we were away from the library. I asked her once if she ever thought of maybe getting a place of her own. Perhaps we could share a flat. She said it was a family obligation to live there, but perhaps they'd allow it. We spent New Year together, drinking baby sham, and as the bells rang, I kissed her on the cheek. She was so surprised. Then 2 weeks later, she heard about readers and called me into her office. I thought she was going to tell me off, but she said she had a job for me. She took me down to the basement. Now, I knew there was a basement, but assumed it was all pipes and boilers and so on. Instead, it was stuffed full of papers and boxes, all higgledy-piggledy, all over the place. I'd like you to sort this out and catalogue this, she said. You don't need to read the papers. In fact, I'd rather you didn't read the stories at all. She looked so odd, her face completely in shadow. She wouldn't look at me. Papers of an old society. Just catalogue it as best you can. I know there's a lot, and it's a mess. I'm relying on you to bring some order to this. Without reading them. You can read titles, names, skim read for dates and places and so on. I know you know how to do that. You're very skilled. Just avoid reading the stories. She left me alone, but she paused at the doorway and turned to me. I never thought about it before, but I just noticed. Noticed what? You have such an interesting voice, Rebecca. I didn't know what to say to that. She paid compliments easily, but this felt like something else. She sighed, her face lit by the lights from the open door. Try not to read the stories, Rebecca. Well, that's how I started. I learned just enough to understand the papers were from a society called Rue, and a few names. Cheveley, Billington, McGowan, Bartlett. Curse, poltergeist, ghosts, psychics, spiders. Then I found the word Ellington. I thought of telling Rose, but lately it had been as if she was avoiding me. No more trips, no more talks. She looked so distant when I saw her. so I started to read. I wish I could remember everything I read. All those tales. Horrifying tales. This endless battle between the Ellingtons as they tried to do the most repulsive acts to bring back their dead, and Rue tried to stop them, but all I can say is, no, and that's more than enough. Rose caught me. She smiled when she saw me read. I didn't like the smile. It didn't seem like Rose. Not the Rose I knew. I don't blame you. They are very satisfying stories. Very well then. You've made your choice. Read as many as you like. Have you read them? She shifted where she stood. The lights in the basement flickered, and for a moment the shadows came alive and surrounded her. I can't read the words. They don't stay still for me. You see a word, but I see just a jumble of letters. She looked ashamed. For a moment I almost mentioned dyslexia or sight problems, but I know Rose read voraciously, so obviously she didn't have those. They've chosen you, she said softly. And then so quietly I almost couldn't hear. She whispered, I wish they hadn't. I looked at her, but she merely smiled that maddening smile of hers and left. The thing is, I can't decide if she knew what was in those papers and wanted me to know. Perhaps she thought I'd help her. Or she didn't know, or she knew and wanted me to stop it. I read all night and all day, and another day I finally understood what I had to do. I had to stop it. I didn't know what, or how, or why. I only knew it was in the attic, and I had to stop it. It was night, and dark in the basement. I had been sitting and thinking for a long time, listening to the whispers, and the cracks, and the knocking. The whole basement felt alive, and perhaps waiting for Rose. Waiting for Rose to come and let me out into the light and tell me it was okay. She'd destroy the attic. We'd destroy the attic together. Sometimes I felt a breath on my neck, and I knew it was her, and that she was behind me. But when I turned, she wasn't there. I had waited too long. It was night. I reached for the light switch and felt a huge shock run through my body. Rose had warned me about the electrics in the basement, how they tended to shock, and it had happened a couple of times, but it had never been so strong. I was knocked back harshly and fell on the floor, knocked out. When I woke up, I was shaken and nauseous, but I had to continue. I had read it, you see. I had read what the end was. I had read who would be there and what their price was. I had read. I wasn't going to let that happen. I wasn't going to let that happen to her. I could save her. I tried to open the door, but it refused to budge. It had never stuck before. In fact, it was always a bit loose, had a tendency to spring open. It was like the building itself was trying to stop me. Eventually, I pushed hard and rushed out into the lobby of the library. The air felt thick and choking, and it hurt to breathe. No reason for it, just the weight of so many waiting and watching to see what I would do. It was dark. There was moonlight. And in the moonlight I saw them all standing there, watching me. The readers. all those people I'd seen in the shelves standing there, watching me. Not moving, not speaking, just watching. I have no idea if there was an audience for a chorus or support. I ran on. The doors stuck and I pulled them aside. The carpet twisted and turned beneath my feet. The walls seemed to bulge out into my path. The air rang with knock-ins. It tried to stop me, but I was determined. This was it. This was what my whole restless life had been waiting for. Even as the stairs broke and buckled beneath me, I ran, and the readers watched. I reached the attic and didn't even hesitate. I knew this door wouldn't let me through. I had pulled the fire axe out of its bracket as I ran, and now I smashed it into the door. The library screamed. A horrific, blood-curdling scream, sounding so human. The scream echoed around me and through me, but I didn't stop. I had to do this for everyone's sake, for her sake. Then I was through. It was as if it had given up and let me in. The attic. I expected Rose to be there, but it was empty. Just a room with a wooden floor and shelves of books and a desk and cabinets of drawers. Nothing more, really. Nothing that terrifying, if you ignore the symbols carved on the floor. I recognized a pentagram and what looked like a Ouija board and a dozen other symbols I didn't recognize. I pulled aside the rugs and found even more signs on the floor. And I flung open the cupboards and found the text, and I pulled the drawers open and found the papers. It had to be destroyed. All of it. I took a statue that was on a table, some very ordinary statue of some Victorian statesman. But he looked wrong, grinning at me. I smashed it against the table and took the sharpest shard, and I attacked the floor, tearing at the symbols carved there. I obliterated them. Then I tore at the books and ripped apart the papers, but it wasn't enough. They could still be put back together and read. I piled them all up into the centre of the room and took out the lighter Rose had given me, and it really was risky, lighting a fire in the library. But all I could think was, thank God she's safe now, as I watched them all burn. I waited for the fire to spread from the ashes, but it didn't. As soon as all the papers were gone, the fire stopped. The floor underneath wasn't even scorched. I walked out of the room and down the stairs. I was exhausted, but didn't feel I could rest. Rose stood there, at the foot of the stairs, watching me descend. She didn't say a word. She looked at me, waited until I stood in front of her, then turned and walked away. I knew I was expected to follow her. It was daylight when we went into the street. She ignored me as she walked, but when I fell behind too far, she stopped and waited for me. The day felt strange. Felt too fast. The cars on the street looked wrong, too shiny, too smooth. The people walking by seemed to change as I looked. Different clothes, odd hair colours, t-shirts with slogans I didn't recognize. They didn't look at me, but they veered around me as I walked past them. The headlines on the newspaper boards flickered past, turning over and over. I wasn't very surprised when we reached the graveyard. Rose stood in front of a gravestone. Rebecca Stone, 1935 to 1986. "We always had a very strong life force," Rose said. "I admit, it wasn't easy that first night. We ran through so fast and did so much, and did it again the next year, and then the next year, and then the next year, and the next year, and the next year, and the next. And I realized it had become a recording. Every year you did it, you destroyed the marks and burned the books." "Yeah." "And every year, the marks came back the next day and the papers returned." "What?" "I was beginning to think you'd never succeed. But this is the year. 2018. They stayed gone. I think there's a turning point. I'll take the credit so they trust me. I'll tell B it was me, but I will know in my heart it was you, Rebecca." She turned to me, and it was as if she could see through me. She looked so sad. "I thought it would be you, Rebecca. I hoped it would, when I realized you were drawn to the Rue Papers. You, with that voice. Do you know, I'd never actually heard the voice before. But then seeing you caught up in the papers, I knew. So that's what it sounds like, I thought. Then I hoped we could find a way to work together. I thought we'd be friends. But you died as soon as you hit the light switch, and I knew they weren't going to let that happen. I'd got too close to you, so you had to die. But you held on, Rebecca. You held on all this time." "Died." "I died. Every year I have watched you try. I think you can rest now. I think Beatrice will take over. She is very determined, but also quite easy to control, if I'm clever." I don't know what happened next. I was suddenly here in the basement. That night, hearing me smash up the attic, and watching her, staring at my dead body. I am saying this into the air because this basement, it remembers things. It records things. And I hope these words will remain. Somehow, someone somewhere will hear them. Beatrice? B, are you there? Can you hear me? My name is Rebecca Stone. Thank you for listening to the Rue Papers. Created, written and performed by Emma Butler. For bonus materials, please visit my Patreon. And don't forget, listeners, some stories should never be read.